Marcus Thompson sat at the mahogany dining table, watching his extended family filter into his grandmother's formal dining room. The annual Thanksgiving gathering at Grandma Rose's house was a tradition that stretched back 20 years, but this year felt different. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife, and Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something was brewing beneath the surface of polite conversation and forced smiles. His cousin Derek strutted in wearing a designer suit that probably cost more than Marcus made in 3 months at his construction job. Derek's wife Linda followed close behind, her diamond bracelet catching the light from the crystal chandelier. They'd been living in their McMansion for 2 years now, ever since Derek's consulting business took off. Marcus had always wondered how Derek managed to afford such luxury on what seemed like minimal actual work. "Marcus," Derek called out with that familiar condescending tone. "Still working with your hands, I see. When are you going to get a real job that doesn't require getting dirty?" The comment stung, but Marcus had learned to ignore Derek's subtle put-downs over the years. What bothered him more was the way other family members seemed to accept Derek's apparent success without question. Aunt Patricia, Derek's mother, swept into the room next, immediately gravitating toward her golden child. She'd always favored Derek over Marcus, despite the fact that Marcus had been the one helping Grandma Rose with repairs around her house, grocery shopping, and doctor's appointments. Derek was too busy with his important business meetings to spare time for family obligations, yet somehow he was still the family success story. Uncle Robert and Aunt Jennifer arrived with their teenage daughter Ashley, who immediately disappeared into her phone. They'd been struggling financially for months after Robert's factory job was downsized, but they maintained appearances as best they could. Marcus noticed the stress lines around Jennifer's eyes had deepened since the last family gathering. Grandma Rose emerged from the kitchen, her silver hair perfectly styled despite spending hours preparing the feast. At 83, she moved with the grace of someone half her age, her sharp blue eyes taking in every detail of the family dynamics playing out in her dining room. She'd built a small fortune through shrewd real estate investments and careful saving, but she'd always been modest about her wealth. "Everyone, please take your seats," Grandma Rose announced, gesturing toward the table set with her finest china. "I have some things I'd like to discuss during dinner tonight." The way she said it made Marcus's stomach clench. He'd noticed she'd been more reflective lately, talking about legacy and making sure her affairs were in order. As they settled into their assigned seats, Marcus found himself directly across from Derek, who was already launching into a story about his latest business acquisition. The conversation flowed around expensive vacations, new cars, and investment opportunities that Marcus couldn't even dream of affording. He picked at his turkey, feeling increasingly out of place among people who should have been his closest family. The evening was about to take a turn that would change everything Marcus thought he knew about his family's dynamics and his own place within it. Grandma Rose had been observing the dinner conversation with growing concern. She'd watched Derek dominate every discussion, talking about his lavish lifestyle while Marcus sat quietly, occasionally glancing up from his plate with what looked like resignation. The disparity between her grandson's apparent circumstances had been weighing on her mind for months, especially since she'd been receiving troubling information about Derek's true financial situation. "Derek, dear," Grandma Rose interrupted his monologue about a recent trip to Monaco, "I'm curious about something. You've been telling us about all these wonderful experiences and purchases. Your consulting business must be incredibly successful." Her tone was pleasant, but Marcus detected an underlying sharpness that made him pay closer attention. Derek's chest puffed up with pride. "Well, Grandma, I've always had a head for business. It's all about knowing the right people and making smart investments. Not everyone has the natural talent for entrepreneurship." He shot a meaningful look at Marcus, who felt his jaw tighten. "That's fascinating," Grandma Rose continued, cutting a small piece of her turkey with deliberate precision. "I've been wondering how you manage to afford such an expensive lifestyle. The house payments alone must be substantial." The table fell quiet, the only sound being the gentle clink of silverware against china. Linda shifted uncomfortably beside Derek, her perfectly manicured fingers fidgeting with her napkin. "Derek works very hard," she said defensively. "He's built something from nothing." But her voice lacked conviction, and Marcus noticed she avoided making eye contact with anyone at the table. "I'm sure he does work hard," Grandma Rose agreed diplomatically. "I just received some interesting information from my financial advisor last week. Apparently, there's been some confusion about certain monetary transactions in our family." She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. "It seems someone has been using my name and forging documents to secure loans and credit lines." The color drained from Derek's face so quickly that Marcus thought he might faint. Patricia gasped, her hand flying to her chest, while Robert and Jennifer exchanged confused glances. Ashley finally looked up from her phone, sensing the dramatic shift in the room's energy. "Grandma, I don't understand what you're suggesting," Derek stammered, his usual confidence evaporating like morning dew. "If someone has been using your name fraudulently, that's terrible. We should call the police immediately." His voice cracked slightly on the last word. Grandma Rose smiled that same sweet smile she'd been wearing all evening, but her eyes had grown cold as winter steel. "Oh, don't worry, dear. I've already spoken with the authorities. They've been investigating for several weeks now. It's amazing what people will do when they think no one is watching." She reached for her water glass, taking a slow sip, while the tension in the room reached a breaking point. Marcus felt like he was watching a master chess player reveal a checkmate that had been 20 moves in the making. He'd always known his grandmother was sharp, but this level of strategic thinking was impressive even for her. Derek, meanwhile, looked like a trapped animal searching for an escape route that didn't exist. Grandma Rose wasn't finished yet. She had more revelations that would shake the family to its core, and she was just getting started. The silence stretched uncomfortably as Grandma Rose set down her water glass with deliberate care. Marcus could hear his heart pounding in his ears, and he noticed Derek's hands were trembling slightly as he reached for his wine. The golden boy of the family was about to fall from grace, and everyone could sense it. "You see," Grandma Rose continued, her voice maintaining that deceptively gentle tone, "when someone uses your identity to secure $250,000 in loans, banks tend to notice, especially when those loans are in default." She folded her hands in her lap, the picture of composed dignity. The investigators were quite thorough. They traced the money, the signatures, even the fake documents. Patricia let out a strangled sob. "Derek, please tell me this isn't true. Please tell me you didn't." She couldn't finish the sentence, her face crumpling as she realized her son's perfect life had been built on a foundation of lies and fraud. "It's not what it looks like," Derek said desperately, his voice rising. "I was going to pay it all back. The business deals were just taking longer than expected. I never meant for anyone to get hurt." His admission hung in the air like smoke, confirming everyone's worst fears. Linda stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "I can't listen to this any more," she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I asked you where the money was coming from. I asked you so many times and you kept lying to me." She grabbed her purse and headed for the door, leaving Derek alone to face the consequences of his actions. Uncle Robert shook his head in disbelief. "Derek, how could you do this to your own grandmother? She's done nothing but love and support this family." His voice was thick with disappointment and anger. "And Patricia, she's been bragging about your success to everyone. Do you have any idea how humiliated she's going to be?" Ashley, still clutching her phone, looked around the table with wide eyes. At 16, she was old enough to understand the gravity of what was happening, but young enough to be shocked by the depths of adult deception. "Are you going to jail?" she asked Derek with the blunt honesty that only teenagers possessed. Derek's face crumpled, and for a moment Marcus almost felt sorry for his cousin. Almost. Then he remembered years of condescending comments, of being made to feel less than, of watching Derek parade around like he was better than everyone else while stealing from their grandmother. "The district attorney's office will make that determination," Grandma Rose said calmly. "Though I suspect given the amount involved and the premeditated nature of the fraud, prison time is quite likely." She turned to look directly at Derek, her gaze unflinching. You used my love for you as a weapon against me. You exploited my trust and my generosity, and you did it while looking me in the eye and accepting my praise for your supposed success. Marcus found his voice for the first time since the revelations began. Grandma, I'm so sorry this happened to you. If you need anything, any help at all. He trailed off, overwhelmed by emotions he couldn't quite name. That's when Grandma Rose delivered the line that would be burned into everyone's memory forever. Grandma Rose turned her attention to Marcus, her expression softening for the first time since the confrontation began. The contrast between her gentle gaze toward him and the steely disappointment she'd shown Derek was striking. Marcus, sweetheart, I need to ask you something important in front of everyone. She paused, ensuring she had the full attention of every person at the table. Is the $2,000 I send you monthly enough? She asked with genuine concern. I worry that it's not sufficient for your needs, especially with rent prices being what they are these days. The question hit the room like a thunderbolt. Every head turned toward Marcus, whose face had gone completely white. Derek's mouth fell open in shock, while Patricia gasped audibly. Robert and Jennifer exchanged bewildered glances, and even Ashley looked up from her phone with renewed interest. Grandma, what are you talking about? Derek sputtered, his voice barely above a whisper. You send Marcus money. How much money? The pieces of a puzzle he'd never known existed were starting to fall into place, and the picture they formed was devastating to his ego. Marcus felt like he was going to be sick. Grandma, please, he said quietly, his voice strained with embarrassment. We don't need to discuss this now. He'd been receiving the monthly support for 3 years, ever since his construction company had downsized, and he'd struggled to make ends meet. But he'd begged his grandmother to keep it private, not wanting to be seen as a charity case by his family. Oh, but we do need to discuss it, Grandma Rose said firmly. Because I've been watching this family for years and I'm tired of the pretense. I'm tired of watching good people feel ashamed while dishonest people parade around like peacocks. Her voice grew stronger with each word. Marcus, you've been helping me with groceries, home repairs, doctor visits, and countless other things while working 2 jobs to support yourself. You never asked for help, and when I insisted on giving it, you made me promise not to tell anyone. The room was so quiet that Marcus could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. His face burned with embarrassment, but there was also something else, a growing sense of relief that his secret was finally out in the open. $2,000 a month, Derek repeated, his voice hollow. For 3 years. He was doing the math in his head, realizing that his cousin had received more than $70,000 in help, while he'd been struggling to maintain his fraudulent lifestyle. Actually, Grandma Rose corrected with a slight smile, it's been 4 years now. And yes, every month without fail, because Marcus never asked for it, never expected it, and never acted like he was entitled to it. He thanked me every single time and tried to refuse it more often than not. Patricia buried her face in her hands, overwhelmed by the evening's revelations. Her golden child was a criminal, while her nephew, whom she'd always considered the lesser of the two boys, had been quietly caring for their grandmother while accepting help with dignity and grace. The truth was finally coming to light, and it was more complex than anyone had imagined. Marcus felt every eye in the room focused on him, and the weight of their attention was almost unbearable. He'd spent years feeling inferior to Derek, accepting the subtle put-downs and condescending remarks because he believed they were justified. After all, Derek was successful, wealthy, and accomplished, while Marcus was just a construction worker who struggled to pay his bills. "I never wanted anyone to know," Marcus said finally, his voice barely audible. "I was embarrassed. Everyone always talked about how well Derek was doing, and I felt like such a failure in comparison." He looked directly at his cousin, seeing him with new eyes. "I thought you had it all figured out, and I was just the family disappointment who needed charity to survive." Grandma Rose reached across the table and placed her weathered hand over Marcus's. "Sweetheart, there is nothing shameful about accepting help when you need it, especially when you give so much in return. Do you know how many nights I've slept better knowing you were just a phone call away? How much peace of mind you've given me by being there whenever I needed something." Derek was still staring at Marcus as if seeing him for the first time. "You've been getting money from Grandma this whole time, and you never said anything. You let me talk down to you, make jokes about your job, act like I was so much better than you." His voice was thick with a mixture of shame and disbelief. "What was I supposed to say?" Marcus shot back, finding his voice as anger began to replace embarrassment. "That I couldn't make it on my own, that I needed help from my grandmother to keep a roof over my head. You would have had a field day with that information." The words came out sharper than he'd intended, years of suppressed resentment finally finding their voice. Uncle Robert cleared his throat awkwardly. "Marcus, nobody here thinks less of you for accepting help. Hell, if I'm being honest, Jennifer and I could use some help ourselves right now." He glanced at his wife, who nodded encouragingly. "We've been too proud to ask, but losing hours at the plant has been brutal." "That's exactly my point," Grandma Rose said, her voice gaining strength. "This family has been so concerned with appearances and maintaining pride that we've stopped taking care of each other. Marcus has been quietly helping me for years while struggling himself, and instead of recognizing his kindness, some of you have been looking down on him." Ashley, who had been unusually quiet throughout the dinner, suddenly spoke up. "So Derek's been fake rich this whole time, and Marcus has been real poor but actually helping people." She had a teenager's gift for cutting through adult complexity to reach the heart of the matter. That's an oversimplification, but not entirely inaccurate, Grandma Rose replied with a wry smile. Derek has been living beyond his means through illegal activity, while Marcus has been living modestly and honestly, accepting help when offered and giving back whenever possible. The contrast between the two cousins had never been starker, and everyone at the table was beginning to see the family dynamics in a completely new light. The revelation had shifted the entire dynamic of the dinner, but Grandma Rose wasn't finished. She had been planning this moment for months, ever since she'd first suspected something was wrong with Derek's finances. The private investigator she'd hired had confirmed her worst fears about Derek, while also revealing information about other family members that had surprised her. "There's more," she announced, causing everyone to look up with a mixture of dread and curiosity. The investigation into Derek's activities led to some interesting discoveries about our family's financial situation as a whole. She reached into her purse and pulled out a manila folder. "It seems I'm not the only one who's been helping family members." Derek's remaining color drained away completely. He'd assumed his financial crimes were isolated, but the way his grandmother was looking at him suggested otherwise. "What do you mean?" he asked, though he clearly didn't want to hear the answer. "I mean that your mother has been sending you money too," Grandma Rose said, her eyes fixed on Patricia. $500 a month for the past 2 years, taken from her retirement savings, money she couldn't afford to lose. Patricia's face crumpled as her secret was exposed to the entire family. "Mom, you didn't," Derek whispered, the full weight of his actions finally beginning to hit him. "You told me that money came from your part-time job at the library. You said it was extra income." His voice broke as he realized how many people he'd been stealing from, directly and indirectly. Patricia could barely speak through her tears. "I wanted to help you succeed. I was so proud when you told me about your business opportunities. I thought I was investing in your future." She looked around the table at her family members, shame written across her features. "I've been eating peanut butter sandwiches for dinner 3 nights a week to afford those payments." Robert slammed his fist on the table, making the china jump. "Derek, how could you take money from your mother when you knew she was struggling? When you knew she was working at 72 years old just to make ends meet?" His voice shook with barely contained rage. "I didn't know she was struggling," Derek protested weakly, but even he seemed to realize how hollow his words sounded. "She never said anything about having problems with money." "Because she was too proud and too loving to burden you with her troubles," Grandma Rose said coldly. "Just like Marcus was too proud to talk about the help I was giving him. The difference is that Marcus was giving back while you were just taking." Marcus felt a surge of protective anger toward his aunt. Patricia had always been kind to him, even when she was clearly favoring Derek. The thought of her sacrificing her own well-being to support Derek's fraudulent lifestyle made him furious. "Aunt Patricia," he said gently, "you should have said something. We could have helped." He looked around the table at the other family members. "We all could have helped if we'd known." The scope of Derek's deception was becoming clearer, and with it, the true cost of his actions on the people who loved him most. Jennifer had been quiet throughout most of the revelations, but now she spoke up with a voice full of bitter understanding. "This is why you always seemed so confident about money, Derek. This is why you could afford to be condescending about other people's financial struggles. You weren't successful. You were stealing from the people who loved you most." The words hit Derek like physical blows. He'd built his entire identity around being the successful one, the smart one, the one who had figured out how to make it in the world. Now that facade was crumbling, revealing the ugly truth underneath. "It wasn't supposed to be stealing," he said desperately. "I was going to pay everyone back with interest once my investments paid off. I had deals in the works, opportunities that would have made everyone rich." He looked around the table pleadingly, searching for any sign of sympathy or understanding. "What deals?" Grandma Rose asked sharply. The investigator couldn't find any evidence of legitimate business activities. No contracts, no clients, no actual work. Just a series of increasingly desperate attempts to borrow money using other people's identities and credit. Derek's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. The truth was that there had never been any real business, just a series of get-rich-quick schemes and gambling debts that had spiraled out of control. He'd been living on borrowed time and stolen money for so long that he'd almost convinced himself his own lies were true. "The cryptocurrency investments," he said weakly, "and the real estate flipping opportunities. They were all legitimate, they just took longer to mature than expected." But even as he said it, everyone could tell he was still lying, still trying to maintain some version of his fictional success story. Ashley laughed humorlessly. "Even I know that cryptocurrency is mostly a scam. You really thought you could get rich quick and then act like you were some kind of business genius." Her teenage cynicism cut through Derek's remaining pretenses. Marcus found himself feeling an unexpected mix of emotions. Part of him was angry at Derek for years of condescending treatment. Part of him was relieved that the truth was finally out, and part of him actually felt sorry for his cousin. Derek had been living in a prison of his own making, constantly terrified that his lies would be discovered. "How much?" Marcus asked quietly. "How much do you actually owe, including what you stole from Grandma and Aunt Patricia?" Derek's face went gray. "Including interest and penalties," probably close to $400,000. The number hung in the air like a death sentence. It was more money than most of the people at the table would see in years, and everyone understood that Derek's chances of ever paying it back were essentially zero. Grandma Rose had saved the biggest revelation for last, and now she was ready to deliver it. The figure of $400,000 seemed to echo in the dining room, each family member processing the magnitude of Derek's financial crimes in their own way. Marcus did quick mental math and realized it would take him nearly 15 years to earn that much money, even with his grandmother's monthly assistance. 400,000, Uncle Robert repeated slowly, shaking his head. Derek, that's more than I'll make in the next 8 years, and you just spent it. On what? His voice was hollow with disbelief. Derek's carefully constructed world was collapsing completely. The house payments, the cars, the vacations. It all added up so quickly. And then there were the gambling debts. He'd finally admitted to the addiction that had been the real driving force behind his financial crimes. Gambling debts, Patricia whispered, her voice barely audible. You told me the money was for business investments. You said you were building something for the future. The betrayal in her voice was heartbreaking. I was going to win it back, Derek said desperately. I had systems, strategies. I was so close to a big win that would have covered everything. He sounded like every desperate gambler who had ever convinced themselves that the next bet would solve all their problems. Grandma Rose had been listening to this exchange with a mixture of sadness and determination. She'd suspected there was more to Derek's story than simple fraud, and his admission about gambling confirmed her worst fears. But she'd also been preparing for this moment for months, and she had one final card to play. Derek, she said, her voice cutting through his rambling explanations, I want you to understand something very clearly. The money you stole from me, the money you took from your mother, the loans you secured using my identity, none of that is going to disappear just because you're sorry now. She opened the manila folder and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents. These are the papers I've filed with the district attorney's office. Wire fraud, identity theft, elder abuse. The charges are quite serious. The prosecutor estimates you're looking at a minimum of 5 years in federal prison, possibly as much as 15. Derek's face went completely white. Grandma, please. I know I made mistakes, but I'm family. Surely we can work something out privately. I'll get help for the gambling. I'll pay back every penny somehow. You should have thought about that before you forged my signature on loan documents, Grandma Rose replied coldly. You should have thought about that before you took your mother's retirement savings. You should have thought about that before you spent years making your cousin feel inferior while you were living off stolen money. Marcus felt a complex mix of emotions watching his cousin's complete downfall. Years of resentment and hurt were being vindicated, but there was no joy in it. Derek was still family, despite everything he'd done. "What happens now?" Jennifer asked quietly. "I mean, practically speaking. What happens to Linda, to their house, to everything they've built their life around?" "Everything that was purchased with stolen money will be seized by the authorities," Grandma Rose explained matter-of-factly. "The house, the cars, probably most of their possessions. Linda will have to prove that anything she wants to keep was purchased with her own legitimate income." The scope of the devastation was becoming clear to everyone at the table. Derek hadn't just destroyed his own life, he'd taken down everyone who had trusted him. But Grandma Rose had one more surprise that would change everything for the family members who had acted with integrity. As the reality of Derek's situation settled over the family, Grandma Rose reached into her folder once more. This time, she pulled out a different set of documents, ones that bore the letterhead of her attorney's office. The tension in the room shifted as everyone realized she had more to reveal. "I've been thinking a lot about family lately," she began, her voice taking on a different tone. "About who shows up when they're needed and who only appears when they want something. About who gives without asking for recognition and who takes while pretending to be generous." She looked directly at Marcus, her expression warm despite the evening's harsh revelations. "Marcus, for 4 years you've been helping me maintain my independence. You've never missed a doctor's appointment when I needed a ride, never been too busy to fix a leaky faucet or change a light bulb I couldn't reach. You've done all of this while working 2 jobs and struggling to make ends meet." Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Grandma, you don't need to thank me. You're family. Of course I'm going to help when you need it." "That's exactly what I mean," she said with a smile. "You see it as just being family, not as a transaction or an opportunity. Which brings me to why I had my attorney draw up some new documents last week." She slid a paper across the table to Marcus, who looked at it with confusion. As his eyes scanned the legal language, his face went pale. "Grandma, what is this?" "It's a deed," she said simply, "to the house. I'm transferring ownership to you, effective immediately." The announcement hit the room like a bomb. "The house is worth about $300,000 and it's completely paid off. No mortgage, no liens, no debt." Derek made a strangled sound, his face contorting with a mixture of shock and desperate hope. "Grandma, if you're giving away property, shouldn't it be divided among all the grandchildren? I mean, legally speaking, I'm still your grandson too." Grandma Rose turned to look at him with eyes like ice. "Derek, you are about to be a convicted felon who stole money from his own family. You'll be lucky if you're not sharing a cell with someone who did exactly what you did to some other family. You have no claim to anything I own." She turned back to Marcus, her expression softening again. "The house is yours, Marcus. You can live in it, sell it, rent it out, whatever you think is best. But there's one condition." Marcus was still staring at the deed in shock. "What condition?" "I want to keep living here for as long as I'm able," she said with a slight smile. "I'll pay you rent, of course. How does 1,500 a month sound? That should more than cover the property taxes and maintenance costs." The irony wasn't lost on anyone at the table. Marcus had gone from receiving help to becoming his grandmother's landlord in the span of a single conversation, while Derek had gone from apparent success to facing federal prison time. Patricia was crying quietly, overwhelmed by the evening's revelations and the stark contrast between her son's dishonesty and her nephew's integrity. But Grandma Rose still had more surprises in store for the family members who had shown their true character. The deed transfer was just the beginning of Grandma Rose's carefully planned redistribution of her assets. She pulled out another set of documents, these ones bearing the seal of her investment firm. The family watched in fascination as she continued to reveal the depth of her planning. "Patricia," she said, turning to her daughter-in-law with compassion in her eyes, "I know Derek's actions have cost you your retirement savings. The investigator was able to trace exactly how much you sent him, $12,000 over 2 years." Patricia nodded miserably, unable to speak. "I'm replacing that money," Grandma Rose announced, sliding a cashier's check across the table. "Plus interest, and enough extra to ensure you can retire comfortably. You've worked hard your entire life, and you deserve security in your golden years, not peanut butter sandwiches because your son was stealing from you." Patricia stared at the check in disbelief. It was for $50,000 more money than she'd ever seen at one time in her life. "Rose, I can't accept this. It's too much." "You can and you will," Grandma Rose said firmly. "You've been like a daughter to me for 30 years. You raised 2 boys largely on your own after your husband died, and you did it with grace and dignity. This is what family does for family." Derek watched this exchange with growing desperation. Every act of generosity toward other family members was making his own situation seem worse by comparison. "Grandma, I know I made mistakes, but I'm still your grandson. Doesn't that count for anything?" "It counted for something when I didn't call the police the first time I suspected you were forging my signature," she replied coldly. "It counted for something when I gave you 3 months to come clean and make things right. You chose to keep lying and keep stealing instead." She turned to Robert and Jennifer, who had been watching the proceedings with a mixture of amazement and awkwardness. "Robert, Jennifer, I know things have been tight since the plant reduced your hours. How much help do you need to get back on your feet?" Robert's pride warred with his practical needs. "Mrs. Thompson, we appreciate the offer, but we'll manage somehow. We always do." "That's exactly the attitude that makes me want to help you," she said with approval. "I'm not offering charity. I'm offering an investment in good people. What would it take to eliminate your financial stress and give you some breathing room?" Jennifer spoke up quietly. "Honestly, if we could pay off the credit cards we've run up trying to cover the shortfall, that would be huge. Maybe $20,000, but we'd insist on paying you back with interest." Grandma Rose smiled and wrote out another check. "Consider it a family loan at 0% interest. Pay me back when you can if you can. If something happens and you can't, don't worry about it." Ashley looked up from her phone with wide eyes. "Grandma Rose, are you like secretly rich or something? You're just handing out money like it's nothing." "I'm not secretly rich, dear," Grandma Rose laughed. "I'm openly rich. I just don't believe in flaunting it or using it to make other people feel small." She shot a meaningful look at Derek. "Real wealth is having enough to help the people you love without expecting anything in return." The evening had revealed not just Derek's crimes, but also the true values that define their family. As the evening wound down, the family members began processing the dramatic revelations and life changes that had occurred over the course of a single dinner. Derek sat in stunned silence, finally understanding the full scope of what he'd lost through his actions. His wife had left, his family had discovered his crimes, and his future held nothing but legal consequences and financial ruin. Marcus was still staring at the deed to his grandmother's house, struggling to comprehend how dramatically his life had changed in just a few hours. From feeling like the family failure to becoming a homeowner with his financial struggles eliminated, it was almost too much to process. "I need to say something," Marcus announced, his voice shaky with emotion. "Derek, what you did was wrong, and I'm angry about the way you treated me for years. But I'm also sorry it came to this. I never wanted to see you destroy your life." Derek looked up with tears in his eyes. "Marcus, I'm so sorry. I was jealous of you the whole time and didn't even realize it. You had Grandma's love and respect, and I was so busy trying to buy mine that I lost everything." His voice broke completely. "I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed you to know that I understand now how badly I screwed up." The apology didn't erase years of condescending treatment, but Marcus found himself nodding slightly. "I hope you get help, Derek. Real help, not just legal help. You've got some serious problems that led to all this." Grandma Rose had been watching this exchange with satisfaction. Her plan hadn't just been about financial justice. It had been about revealing the true character of each family member and rewarding those who had shown integrity. "There's one more thing," she announced, pulling out a final document. "I've updated my will based on everything that's happened. Marcus, the house transfer is immediate, but I want you to know that you're also inheriting the bulk of my estate when I'm gone. The investments, the savings accounts, everything." She looked around the table at each family member. "Patricia, Robert, Jennifer, you'll all receive substantial inheritances as well. You've all shown me what real family looks like." Then she turned to Derek. "You will receive nothing, not because I don't love you, but because I can't reward what you've done to this family." Derek's final hope had been that he might somehow inherit enough money to pay back what he'd stolen. Now even that possibility was gone. "I understand," he whispered. "I deserve this." The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 10 times, marking the end of a Thanksgiving dinner that had changed everything for the Thompson family. As people began to clear the table and prepare to leave, the new reality was setting in for everyone. Marcus had gone from struggling construction worker to property owner and future inheritor of substantial wealth. His grandmother had shown him that sometimes good people are rewarded, even when they don't expect it. Derek faced federal prison time and the complete collapse of the life he'd built on lies and stolen money. His story would serve as a cautionary tale about the true cost of deception and greed. But perhaps most importantly, the family had learned the difference between real success and the illusion of prosperity, between genuine love and transactional relationships. 3 months later, Derek was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison for wire fraud, identity theft, and elder abuse. The judge had been particularly harsh because of the victims' ages and family relationship. Linda had filed for divorce and moved back with her parents, taking only the few possessions she could prove were purchased with her own money.